জাগ্রত করো উদ্যত করো নির্ভয় করো হে মঙ্গল
Chameli, as you know, was, I mean, closely associated with Shantiniketan. Her father came here, if I remember rightly, I think around 1928. So, in every sense of the word, she is a product of this place. She studied here from the school. She learned the language, and like the rest of her family, especially her sister, elder sister, and brothers, she was greatly immersed in the literature of Rabindranath, and also in the art movements and the ethos of Kalabhavan. So these two things she carries with her even today. But Kalabhavan itself was a place where the whole of Asia came together, and this is what Rabindranath wanted. The institutions in Shantiniketan should become a place where everything that is of value in Asia would come together, and it would then form a seat where India could have a dialogue, or the East could have a dialogue with the West. So, in some sense, Kalabhavan was already a place which was responsive to the rest of Asia, including China. And Nandalal and Rabindranath had travelled to China in 1924, and even before that, artists from Japan had come here. So, the art traditions of these countries, which are very rich, were already a part of the Kalabhavan practice in terms of both the collections that they made as well as the practice that these artists did. So, you can see even before her father came to Shantiniketan, Shantiniketan had a strong contact with the cultures of China and Japan. So, she would have felt very much at home, because her father and her parents, being deeply immersed in Chinese culture, and that was there, and also the Buddhist religion and its culture. So, these were also very much at home in Shantiniketan. So, while she was here and she inherited the ethos of this place itself was open to and receptive to the cultures of China and other parts of Asia. So, she might have felt very much at home growing up in Shantiniketan, and her teachers, especially Nandalal and Binod Bihari, they were deeply interested in the Chinese traditions of painting and in the calligraphic traditions of representations. And before she arrived itself, there was a large body of work they created where these traditions were absorbed. Now, Chameli in a sense carries many of these characters in her work. I mean, as you know, she uses largely ink, works on paper like Chinese artists did, and she responds to nature. Now, response to nature was also something that Rabindranath cultivated and wanted artists to cultivate. So, it is not surprising, both by her Chinese background and by her education here, that Chameli should be doing the kind of work she's doing. They are extremely intimate in nature, they are not grand in scale, but each work is a very close look at something around her, a tree, a kind of thing. Now, of course, in Delhi, maybe nature is not available to her as it was here. So, there is also the memory of this place in the work. But every little aspect of nature she notices enters the work. And she has some of those things, trees, plants, flowers, other aspects of nature. These are a mainstay as far as the thematic aspect of a work goes. But she brings a delicacy and a subtlety of brushwork, which is a very Chinese quality, into her work. So, her work, I would say, is an amalgam of these two traditions that she inherited. The traditions, pictorial traditions of her native China and the pictorial traditions of Shantiniketan. In a way, you'd say Shantiniketan is more home to her than China.
Chameli Ramachandran was born in Shantiniketan and grew up on the idyllic campus of Vishwabharati University. Shantiniketan was founded by Nobel laureate poet Rabindranath Tagore. Spending her growing years there, it is quite understandable how nature has been a source of inspiration as well as solace for Chameli Ramachandran. Her birth name was Than Chameli. She remembers her childhood, during which schooling in Shantiniketan was a joyous experience and exciting too, since learning was accompanied by music and art and creativity. Classes were held under trees. Tagore knew the importance of nature as the source of all knowledge, providing inspiration for creativity. Tagore, we know, was greatly influenced by ancient Indian culture, especially the philosophy of the Upanishads. Since Vedic literature was composed by rishis in forests, Tagore chose a small place, Shantiniketan, for his experimental institution away from his hometown Kolkata. He named it Vishwabharati, where the world met in a single nest. Tagore wanted teachers and students from all over the world to pursue knowledge and exchange ideas at Vishwabharati. Chameli's father, Chinese scholar Tan Yun Shan, was a devout Buddhist for whom India, the land of the Buddha, was a heavenly country. He was also an ardent admirer of Tagore, whose writings he would regularly savor in English and Chinese translations. He was teaching in Singapore when he met Tagore in 1927. He was bowled over by Tagore's personality and agreed to join Vishwabharati without any hesitation when Tagore told him he was looking for a Chinese scholar. In 1928, Tan Yun Shan left his newly married wife, who was expecting their first child, and came to settle in Shantiniketan. Vishwabharati was short of funds in those days, and Chameli's mother, Chen Nai Wei, who was a teacher and the principal of a school in Malaya, supported her husband for a few years. Tan Yun Shan made a number of trips to China, lecturing about the importance of reviving cultural ties between the two great ancient civilizations that had influenced a large part of world culture. It took Tan Yunshan a few years to raise funds for China Bhavan. He was also able to collect a large number of rare Chinese books for the China Bhavan library. Chameli's mother came to settle in Shantiniketan in 1939, bringing the younger two of her 4 children, leaving the elder 2 in China with relatives.
What I know is that my father met Tagore in Singapore in 1927 when he was on his way to Japan by boat and stopped there. So my father went to meet him, rather to pay respect to him. And they went on very well, and Tagore said, I was just looking for a person to come to Shantiniketan and teach Chinese, the language, literature and history and culture of China. Because Tagore gave great importance to Chinese culture, because India and China, the two large neighbors of very old civilizations which survived all these 1,000 years, whereas the oldest civilizations of Middle East, they have disappeared, no? They are not continuous civilization. No? Egypt and Mesopotamia are not the same today. But Chinese civilization and Indian civilizations are continuing till today, more than 5,000 years or much more than that. So that is very, and so much of cultural exchange went on. Chinese monks, they came in those days, just imagine, through deserts, crossing mountains, they came. When Henshan came to study Buddhism, he stayed in India for 13 years and learned Sanskrit. That he carried all the text of Buddhism on his back and went back to China. So like that, many more came. Some died on way, and that also happened. Then Indian monks also went, and like Bodhidharma went from South India and established this Zen Buddhism, Dhyana Buddhism. In Chinese it is San Buddhism. Then went to Japan and became Zen. So that Bodhidharma took from India to China. So this exchange of cultural aspect was going on for thousands of years.
If you remember, one of the first Western scholars who came here was Sylvian Levy, who was a great scholar of Buddhism and China. So in 1921 already there was this effort, and others followed. So the study of Indian traditions and Sanskrit and so on, Winternitz followed him. So, and Buddhism and China, they were already beginning here. Now it is against this background, Tan Yunshan, Chameli's father, comes here in 1928, and he gives a big boost to this effort, because he understands Rabindranath's needs. He is very keen about building a center for Chinese studies in India and in Shantiniketan. So he goes back and he collects the money that is required for this. So without him, probably China Bhavan would not have been realized. And following that, many scholars from China came here, stayed here for shorter or longer periods, interacted. He himself studied Sanskrit, and he was a great Buddhist scholar. And well into the 60s, China Bhavan was a great center for studies of ancient Chinese culture, and also about the interactions between China and India in the past, because the scholarly focus of the people who were part of this institution was to go back to the interaction between China and India under Buddhism. So, they undertook a lot of study of how Buddhism connected these countries, also of how the text traveled, and in fact a lot of text, Buddhist texts which were written in India in Sanskrit or other Indian ancient languages were lost in India, but preserved in China. So, China Bhavan played a role in translating those texts back into Sanskrit or Indian kind of thing. So, China Bhavan was a very, very important center for Indo-Chinese interaction and studies, not only just to teach language, but to understand how these two cultures developed, especially through the medium of Buddhism. Shantiniketan is a place where we can see a lot of murals, outdoor sculptures and so on. Most of his old buildings have very important works by artists of this place. Now, this happened partly because of Rabindranath's interest in taking art out of the studios and bringing it into the public space, which is shared by the community. And this is something that he wanted Indian artists to do. Nandalal had similar interest. Unlike his teacher Rabindranath, he was interested in public art, and he was greatly inspired by the murals of Ajanta and so on. So, their ideas about what an artist should do and the role of art in public culture coincided, and that is how Shantiniketan became a place with so many murals, so many works which you can see outdoor and which is accessible to the community. Now, it is in this context that we see the murals in China Bhavan. These were done over a short period, about 4-5 months in 1942, soon after the building itself was completed. So, in fact, the whole of Kala Bhavan worked for a few months in China Bhavan. Ram Kinkar and his students did the reliefs outside. Nandalal did the Nadir Puja, which was something which was not only a Buddhist subject, but very close to his heart. But I think the best version and the best preserved version of is the mural on the outer veranda of China Bhavan by Nandalal. It is a great work of art. Inside you have a little portion of Ajanta painting blown up on the back wall of the central hall, which was done by the women students working under his daughter. And on the staircase that you take to the library on the first floor, Binod Bihari did his fabulous little gem of a piece called On the Campus Life of Shantiniketan, where China Bhavan also figures. Now, so in a sense, this whole project, which was taken up in early 1942, makes it one of the more important buildings in Shantiniketan.
Chameli was born in 1940, the fifth of her parents' children and the first to be born in India. Tagore named her Chameli, a fragrant, delicate white flower. Many of her contemporaries were also blessed with names given by Tagore. Tagore said that the Chinese names had 3 syllables, and so was the case with the name Chameli. He felt that the 3 syllables had a distinct Chinese flavor and texture of sound.
It was given by Tagore when he heard that a daughter was born into my father. So he said, name her Chameli. In Bengali it is Chameli, because this it is a favorite flower of his. There are a lot of poems in which Chameli, the flower Chameli is mentioned. But Tagore thought the name sounds like Chinese.
Chameli was happy to study under the trees and lead a simple and free life. She loved nature right from her childhood and marveled at the light dancing on leaves and branches swinging in the breeze. The most wonderful experience at Shantiniketan was listening to Rabindra Sangeet from morning till night, bringing beauty and tranquility. Rabindra Sangeet got so ingrained in her system that even at this old age, it is able to inspire, console, and cheer her up.
I am very much influenced by Tagore's songs. Of course, Tagore's poems, he has written great poems. My sister, elder sister, was a professor of Bengali in Delhi University. So sometimes she used to read to me. But I could hear the Rabindra Sangeet from morning till evening in Shantiniketan you hear. And some of the students would sing on while walking also. It was a very so later when I came to Delhi, so I used to remember the tunes, then I remember the words. Then I realized that Tagore has written about all kinds of human emotions. When you are sad, like the poem you asked, Ache dukho ache mrityu, biraho dahano lage. Tobuo shanti, tobuo anando, tobuo ananto jage. Yes, there is death, there is sorrow, and there is sadness of parting. But still, there is so much of tobuo anando. There is anando, tobuo shanti. There is peace, there is ananda, and there is the eternal Anant. It is always there. So when you realize that, then you think sorrow is not permanent thing in life. We used to have early dinner, 7:30. Then 8:30 when we finished, my father won't allow us to study anymore. Studying should be done before that. So we had to sit at the back of our house. There was a veranda with a seat. So we used to sit on that. It is how to explain that? Some parapet. So we sit. Then we used to talk. Sometimes father used to tell about, depending on his mood. And father used to say that if you study too much at night, your eyes will be affected. So he said you have to look at the sky with stars. That improves your vision. And also, when you look at the sky, then you realize how enormous the universe is. So we forget our ego and the daily, this meanness and smallness. When you look at the sky, you realize you are only tiny particle in this universe. So forget about all those pettiness and you have to expand your mind. That is what he used to tell us. Only most of the classes were held under the trees. Shalbithi, there's a row of sal trees. It was called Shalbithi. We used to sit under it, and in springtime the flowers would fall on us. So it was a very beautiful experience. Of course, it used to divert us also from our studies. So sometimes we would look at the trees. But I think the closeness you experience with nature started so early. And Nandalal daughter Gauri Bhanjo, she was so expert, she actually elevated Alpana into a form of art, I would say. And in those days, nowadays I hear people in Kalabhavan, they make Alpana with brush. But that fun, Alpana is with hand, it's spontaneous flow of line. So even that, if that is not so even or anything, that has its own beauty, which cannot be painted like with brush. No, it's not a painting, it's a design which is very spontaneously done. So it has its own quality. So that time it was we were small children in Pattabhavan. We used to go and watch how Gauri Mani showed the students how to lay out the alpanas. I was sort of new to Shantiniketan again. So they took me to Kalabhavan. So that Kalabari, you must have heard about it. The Kinkoda was taking class under the Saptaparni tree near Kalabari. So he was teaching the students to do watercolors. So when I went, he said, I wash. So I sat there and he took out a paper and with a few strokes, this way, made a face this way and this way, then eyes and then hair, and it is done. No, now actually he made two. First one he didn't like it so much, so he didn't sign. The second one he liked it and he signed and said now. So I said, my God, portrait, we had the idea portrait is like photograph. What is this? Only two lines here and there. And so naturally 10 years old, I had no idea what art was. So I didn't appreciate that much at that time.
Chameli loved to paint right from her childhood and opted for art as a subject for her matriculation. She joined Kala Bhavan after finishing her schooling, even though she had stood first in the board examinations. Ramachandran joined Kala Bhavan in the same year, but Chameli was senior to him since she had got admission in the second year for doing a 2-year art course in school. However, she always looked up to him since he had a master's degree in literature and was very well read and talented. Chameli was a good student in school. However, she could not do well at Kala Bhavan. During her school years, Chameli experienced and lived art in a deeper sense. Chameli was a shy and timid girl and was careful not to fall in love and create problems in the family.
I was in love with his work first. I was one of his earliest admirer of his work. I still remember the paintings he used to do, and he liked to show me also. And I really admired his works very much. I'm not very extrovert or very adventurous type, you know. So I was careful not to fall in love or anything that easily. But I really admired his work. I think I fell in love with his work before I loved him. So that is the, you know, when he used to show me, call me sometimes and show his work. And I used to be very impressed. So gradually, things change. And my admiration never reduced or it only increased when I lived with him and saw him working. How much involved he's in his, when he dedicated in his work. I think that is very rare thing. I don't know, I don't want to make any statement as such, but I think his dedication is very rare.
It looks as if I have to go back to Mohenjo-daro and start from there. Actually, Chameli came when I joined in Colaba. I was in the first year and she was in the second year because she had taken art as a subject in the school. She was admitted to second year. Chameli came to ask me to contribute something to a wallpaper magazine, which she was the editor. And she came with a beautiful Chinese umbrella, and she was very delicate looking, and in a sari, a very beautifully starched sari. And after she left, I found I'm totally intoxicated and flat. That interview, I had never recovered from that first meeting. And she says she never loved me at that time. So for her it took a long time to decide. In my case, somehow I felt, this person is going to be a part of my life. And it was a very strong faith. I didn't know what is the reason for it. It was a strong faith. Finally, of course, my faith succeeded in the whole process, because I was like an uncut stone in the current of Narmada river. In that she is like Narmada river. So with the little pressure of her waves, I rolled in this sand and pebbles, and finally I got a perfect shape of a shivling. That is what happens to Narmada in the current when the stones flow. So she was something like that. She molded me and made me what I am today. I can't say that about her, because I didn't mold her. She had her own culture. She had her own personality. I could never penetrate that area, and she kept intact that part of her personality all through her life. So in a sense, I am very happy. In spite of being an artist like me, she kept her integrity completely intact. That when she, after many years, when the children flew away from our nest, when we became alone, both of us, then she turned to her paintings. And then I realized how she has kept herself completely watertight compartments, her character, her taste, her aptitude, and her opinion. See, even though she admired my work, I am very glad to say she is least influenced by me, even though she is my wife. So when I look at her, my greatest satisfaction is that in spite of all these things, her personality and her culture, especially being a Chinese, coming from a family of people who are very enlightened people, and then the culture she imbibed from her family, she gently imparted to our children and shaped me into a better human being.
There was hardly any art market in India when Chameli married Ramachandran. It was not easy to run the house, but Ramachandran was confident and somehow they managed. Ramachandran worked hard, teaching at Jamia Millia Islamia in New Delhi, designing postage stamps and currency notes, doing book illustrations and cover pages, etc. Chameli was always an admirer of Ramachandran's works. Living with him and seeing him work increased her admiration 1,000-fold. She realized that other than his talent, it was his constant study from life and nature that enabled him to develop such mastery in drawing. Ramachandran played with his children, daughter Sujata and son Rahul, and told them stories at bedtime. Many of the stories were created extempore. Chameli and Ramachandran jointly illustrated some of these stories for Thomson Press. Later, these children's books were very well received in Japan and won them awards. Chameli also helped Ramachandran to do several miniature paintings, patiently filling in areas with thin color washes. Her other humble contribution to Ramachandran's works is writing down what Ramachandran dictated. They would spend a lot of time discussing art and enjoyed visiting museums immensely whenever they went abroad. Thus, they had a most happy and meaningful life together. Chameli started doing her own work when their children went abroad for higher studies. She made sketches of plants, flowers and foliage in her garden. Then she took out the Chinese black ink tablet and brushes and tried her hand on paper after a long gap of time. She enjoyed working with black ink and did not miss using colors. She developed good control over the use of a Chinese brush loaded with ink. She soon evolved a personal style, which eminent scholar Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan felt was part Shantiniketan and part Chinese.
There is although she's painting Indian scenes, Indian landscape, Indian scenes, or sometimes American landscape also. But a certain Chinese sensibility is there. It may be because of the medium and the brushwork, you know, but there is an unmistakable Chinese sensibility, I feel. A sort of an inner depth, even in the midst of a joyous outburst, there is a kind of an austerity inside, identification with her subject. I think these are the things which I feel reflect, what shall I say, the Chinese or the East Asian aesthetics somewhere.
In October 2003, Gallery Threshold organized an exhibition, Landscape in Pictorial Space. In this exhibition, the focus was on two contemporary artists, Tan Chameli Ramachandran and Paramjit Singh. Noted art critic Ella Datta wrote in the catalogue of the exhibition, "Both artists stand apart from the European landscape tradition. Both do not paint nature as they see it, but capture their mental images. They attempt to put on paper some essence of nature, its poetry and rhythm. Both work with a degree of spontaneity."
She held an exhibition in Habitat, and I saw first time her work, and I was very impressed because the work was, of course it has a lot of Chinese flavor, but it was very sensitive, and I think it was also different from the real Chinese art. It has lot of Indian flavor in it, and the not only the Chinese way of wash, but the European way of wash was also there in her watercolors. So then later I really liked that work, and then I suggested to Tunti Chauhan, who was running a gallery. She has just begun the gallery, Threshold, that why not myself and Chameli, my work, my drawings, and Chameli's watercolor drawings, we had a show together. So Tunti held one show where, and she produced a catalogue also, which was very well done, and that thing, I think it was very good exhibition. It was very well taken, and her work is very sensitive, very there's a touch in it, you know. It's not a kind of violent, exuberant work. It's a work which flows very quietly, and it is produced through a very sensitive touch with the help of ink and water and a few other tints. It's a very sensitive and very poetic work.
I think she's a very distinct voice in contemporary Indian art. One is her kinship with nature, the emotional bond that she conveys in her art. That's certainly, I feel, quite unique. Also her language, her technique of calligraphy has its own place in today's Indian art scene. It's very important when one is looking at her work to realize that she is not trying to see what others are doing, what the mood of the time is. She's expressing what is going on in her own mind, within herself. And she doesn't care whether it's fashionable or not, whether it's part of the milieu or not. Her identification with nature, I think, to me, it conveys a great emotional depth, which for the viewer is very, very moving and easy to identify with. Her language also is so distinctive. The brushwork, it's recognizable. It's moving across the paper with its own rhythm. And the complete control that she has over it, the various depths of color, well, ink really, which moves me very much. It's quite exhilarating to see. The brush is almost dancing on the paper. And it's just not the trees and the flowers. When she did those paintings of waves of the sea or the rocks on the seashore, the dancing pigeons, not dancing, but the pigeons are flying, but they have the movement of dancing bodies. In each one, she can capture the character of that object, movement, when it's the waves, the rocks, whatever she's doing. And that's quite unique, I would say, in her work. The sensitivity she brings to the movement of her brush is again something very special. When she's applying the ink, it's not uniform. It has its own gradation, creating its own rhythm by itself. And then you think about it and you think how amazing it is that here she's producing all this without previous plan, without drawing, just the movement of the brush dipped in ink. And such a variety of lines, tones, textures that comes out of.
After working from nature for some 30 years, Chameli feels nature is an unlimited source of inspiration. She says that is why artists from all over the world, especially the East, have been working from nature since time immemorial, and that tradition still continues. Rabindra Sangeet would invariably come to her mind whenever she painted, be it a lotus flower, a flight of pigeons, or branches of trees swaying in the breeze. Indeed, as a child, Chameli used to dream of flying in the sky. When she started to paint regularly, the flight of pigeons was one of her favorite subjects. In Kerala, during winters, a lot of pigeons would gather near her windows. She realized how beautiful the world was and how precious was human life. It has been rightly said that Chameli strikes a distinct note in contemporary Indian art. She transmutes her keen observations of nature into a meditative study through her sensitive, fluid brushwork.
যাবার দিনে এই কথাটি বলে যেন যায়, যা দেখেছি যা পেয়েছি তুলনা তার নাই। এই জ্যোতির সমুদ্র মাঝে যে শতদল পদ্ম রাজে, তারই মধু পান করেছি ধন্য আমি তাই। যাবার দিনে এই কথাটি জানিয়ে যেন যায়।
जा